Yes, I could do a countdown next time, but I don't get a countdown, folks. We are actually live now with a Friday Rabble Rants. My name is Jessa. Welcome. Normally, you hear me on Blueprints of Disruption, which is a podcast dedicated to amplifying really the grassroots work, as well as kind of unpacking these power systems we're all trying to break down. But today, on Fridays at noon, I bring some folks into the studio and we get to rant. We get to rant about the news items that have us most upset, or maybe the ones that people aren't talking about enough, or maybe the ones that people are talking too much about. You'll get a mix of it today. We're going to be, in a minute, we'll introduce Ashley and Joe. You'll remember Joe from last week. We're going to be unpacking quite a bit this week. We're going to be talking about the ceasefire, how we feel about it, what we can expect next. Then we're going to go into the Mark Carney craze, which will have a little bit of the leadership race talk, but right now it's all about Carney. Freeland's about to enter the race, but we'll pick on her later, and we have before. So then the RCMP are getting some new Black Hawks. We need to talk about that because it's ACAB over here, and there's even more to unpack about that. Barrick Gold also had a lot of assets seized, which makes me happy. You can find out why when we get to that topic. And the TikTok ban. Is it the TikTok or TikTok? I don't know. But
I'd like to call it the TikTok the same way as we did the Facebook.
The Facebook. It makes me sound old. I am on the TikTok, but the Supreme Court ruling came down today, and that has everybody talking. So it will have us talking as well. So let's welcome the folks that are going to rant alongside me. You can also make comments. Sometimes we've added topics to the discussion just based on what the audience has said, but some of the input here has come from our guests. So Ashley, welcome to your first Rabble Rants. It's not your first time in our studio, though. You did a great episode with us on the agricultural industry, corporate mostly, and that was a great episode I still refer back to. But tell the audience about yourself before we get into our rants.
My name is Ashley. You can find me on TikTok. My handle is Queen of the Herd 613. I'm mostly just like a hobbyist political aficionado. What do you call it? Someone who's interested in politics, but I have no real, I don't do this professionally or anything. And so, I really like things that particularly feed into food sovereignty, food sustainability, climate, all that fun stuff. So that's kind of my thing. And I think that when we're going to talk about Mark Carney, this is totally up my alley because this guy is just fraudster 101, especially when it comes to the climate.
Fraudster 101. I don't think he'll be using that in his campaign material.
No.
But I'm excited to hear more dirt on Carney because I think just from outset we have all these reasons to hate him without the dirt. But Joe, I'm glad to see you back. Thanks for jumping in again today. Remind people who you are.
Yes, my name's Joe. I go by the handle Joe Morris 73 on multiple platforms, including Twitter and TikTok as well. I'm an activist that's local around the Ottawa area, as well as I've done a podcast for a couple of years with Dina, a friend of mine, who will go into detail in later episodes. And since then, I've been doing a lot of continuing activism work in regards on social media, as well as attending Palestine protests, as I wear the red keffiyeh, and generally try to be a loud, rabble-rousing. I do what I can.
Disturbers. We have lots of names for ourselves that we say lovingly.
Absolutely. Oh, I've got a few names from others too. So
I consider myself a Sagittator. I am a Sagittarius, and I find a lot of Sagittarius fit that mold. That isn't a slight to other signs or any indication that I believe in that shit, but I do use that playful name from time to time. And my co-host Santiago is also a Sagittarius, so we are Sagittators. But the red keffiyeh, it is my choice of color when wearing my keffiyeh as well. And that's just going to bring us right into our first topic is the ceasefire. I feel kind of numb about it because I don't know what it's going to mean. Let's talk about that, but I would like to maybe just check in with folks on how it felt when you heard that a ceasefire deal had been reached. Joe, you've got the kafia on. I'll let you go first.
I instinctively went sort of meh. And
How dramatic.
yeah, exactly. Now, understand, don't get me wrong. If they get the ceasefire and any moment of peace that Palestinians are going to enjoy from that, absolutely. I went meh because it's one of those, well, they say they're going to do a ceasefire. Let's see how long it's going to last. It's not known for it to last very long because, again, Israel has been known to break the ceasefires. In fact, there's been still a body count that's been rising. I think it's around 100. It just broke since the ceasefire was declared. So I'm not, again, I'm not against the ceasefire. I'm just going my in regards to, I'll see how well it goes. And right now, it's kind of what I'm expecting. There's still the numbers going up, and I still view it as it's going to be temporary. They're going to eventually, at some point, just go back to the bombardment. No reason for them not to, right?
Ashley, were you meh?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it was good news. I mean, I saw a lot of Palestinian folks celebrating online, which is great for them. I mean, I hope that they get as much peace as possible. But I don't trust it. I really don't trust it. I feel like it's going to get broken the minute they come up with an excuse to break it. So, yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I did was, reach out to some of the Palestinians that I know and just kind of offer hope because I could feel the same coming from them, so I wanted to mirror it. And I think I was a little naive when I felt like we could all just take a breath for a second. I thought that's what I wished upon all my comrades out there that are just like probably burnt out. Like maybe they can just take a breath soon. Even though there's so many reasons to just actually put your foot to the pedal at that point. And to your point, Ashley, or both you and Joe mentioned not trusting the ceasefire. I don't know if many folks know this, but in Lebanon, in South Lebanon, the bombing has not stopped. The IDF continues to occupy land that they took just recently on top of land that they already had of Lebanon's. And like Joe said, the numbers are going up, and I think it's time to just also reflect that we're talking about 100,000 people dead, and that's still some sort of estimate because of how many people are trapped in the rubble and amidst all the chaos that exists there. 69% of all of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. And this is going to be primarily hospitals, libraries, schools, apartment buildings, the water infrastructure. The siege would continue even under a ceasefire. So I think, like, on Blueprints of Disruption, I think from the very onset of this, we've echoed the ceasefire language of our guests, but always with this caveat that even in a ceasefire, like, the job is not done. The occupation still needs to be dismantled. But just after so long, like 460 days, I did feel like perhaps if this does give a ceasefire, even for a moment, that moment is needed, to refresh the resistance, which they have not ended, thankfully. That might rub some people the wrong way, but like Israel absolutely has not reached their goal. They have not ended the resistance. They are still losing troops in the north of Gaza. That indicates there's still a strong resistance there. And that leaves me hopeful. But then also, if the job's not done, then it just feeds into your point to the two of you that would any ceasefire hold for very long. But I will take any little kernel of hope at this point, though. No, like I think as long as it comes with,
There's I mean, there's definitely some good in regards to the Palestinians getting a break. And again, anything that stops bombs on there, I think we all agree, is just a good thing in general. Obviously, our issue is very much in we don't trust that the ceasefire will maintain because we don't. My view is I don't see a motivation for Israel to change. I could see them being willing to ceasefire. Like, you know what? Okay, we'll take ceasefire right now with Hamas down in Gaza, while we go focus on Lebanon and sort of wrap up with Lebanon. I think there was even talks about preparation with Syria. They get they're also keeping an eye on Iran. So they got multiple fronts. They're like, oh yeah, we'll do a ceasefire here. We'll go deal with these guys, and once we're done, yeah, we're gonna go back here and go get some U.S. summer homes built up over in Gaza. Like it's horrible. And so that's kind of my view of the whole.
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of talking about the actual ceasefire agreement, I think it's one point to note from our perspective is the language around the prisoner exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians are not prisoners. Like, these are folks not facing charges. They're not even combatants. These are just literally men and sometimes women and children just rounded up. I saw Joe going, no.
Not just the men and women.
Don't you forget about the children. There's a huge report that I have linked before. I can't remember it, but it just details the amount of child prisoners that are in Israeli jails. I called them prisoners again, but that language is there and it matters. And when you're looking at the swap, at least it looks like there are reports that 1,000 Palestinian captives will be released. And that will be just a fraction of the people being held, 1,000. So when you hear folks use that language, and our politicians love to say it, all the hostages must return. I like to pretend that they're talking about the Palestinians as well. I know they're not.
No.
They mean the Israeli hostages, the Zionist hostages, and but I think folks should just keep that in mind, because the last time that there was an exchange of captives, it was very disproportionate, the numbers. So the fact that such a belligerent state like the Zionist state still maintains how justified they are, but still has such an unequal captive exchange, right? They will give 1,000 Palestinians for every half dozen Israelis that they get released. And it's just because they have that many and they think that little of their lives. So,
yeah.
Like I'll add an update here now because it's just related. Folks occupied the Globe and Mail offices in Toronto this week. Not always drawing attention to Gaza and the West Bank, which continues to see actually increased violence now since the ceasefire. But they were there also to highlight the Canadian media's complete failure. And it's not even like a failure like, oops, we didn't do our job. They did a great examples of the language the Globe and Mail uses that are just dripping with bias. And so they held that down for quite some time. So again, I imagine.
I did see, I saw I think it was on X, or Twitter. I saw somebody post about the fact that typically before an inauguration that there is a ceasefire, that if there is conflict between Israel and another country, and I guess before Barack Obama's inauguration in 2008, that there was a ceasefire announced right ahead of his inauguration. And so this is actually like part of their like just strategic or their agreement with the United States that if there is, Israeli combat going on, that they will agree to a ceasefire in advance of an inauguration. So I thought that was really interesting because I was like, I don't think Trump is actually really responsible for the ceasefire. I suspect that it's just, like I said, like that a natural progression that there's an inauguration, so you're going to have to stop anyways. There's no funding, there's no Congress, so you're going to have to stop for a bit. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
It is. He's clearly trying to take credit for it, but probably only in certain circles. Depends on how it all turns out too, right? Who tries to take credit for what? Politics are so fucking fickle.
I know.
But when it comes to Israel, the other thing too to remember is when a large event occurs, it's usually the time when you want to keep an eye on Israel and Gaza. When we had the Super Bowl, that's when a bombing campaign picked up. When other events are occurring during the election, certain events also picked up during that time because, again, the world is distracted with the U.S. Inauguration, huge distraction. We got ceasefire then.
Yeah.
I'd be concerned, and I'd be very curious as to whether or not if they go to break the ceasefire in the short in the upcoming days, I wouldn't be surprised if it's on Monday.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Another thing about Israeli ceasefires is they're allowed to break them, but their opponents are not.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, Hezbollah is not really able to respond in the way that they, legally should be able to because of the media bias that we talk about. So it puts them in this, and just other political conundrums. But it's a complete imbalance there when there is a ceasefire, because Israel will always find justification in, hitting a military target or blaming it on any form of resistance, which is still legal under international law. So that is an international law, whatever the hell that means now. But I would be interested to talk to a lawyer to see what position that actually puts Hamas in when they are legally allowed to resist the occupation, but under a ceasefire agreement. Not that you can just sue someone or anything, like there's recourse under a ceasefire other than more violence. So again, this is supposed to take hold on Monday. Today is Friday, so that's in 2 days, on the 19th, and I guess we'll just have to have another reaction. I am going to have Anna Lippman of Independent Jewish Voices and Labor for Palestine on, as well as Fatima. We had Fatima on for a round table earlier. She's a Palestinian activist from Edmonton area. So we'll unpack that with them as well. But let's transition now to another regime change of sorts, not Trump coming in. We talked a little bit about that last week. I don't like talking about him all that much, but it's kind of inevitable sometimes. But the Liberals, we may have a new government, but even within our government, they are in turmoil. The Liberals have a leadership race, and Mark Carney went on with Jon Stewart, and that meant with that we were talking about this guy all week long. He's now announced he's going to run for the leadership of the Liberals, even though he doesn't hold a seat. And Ashley couldn't be happier, because now she gets to talk about Carney all over again. We have a lot of reasons to hate this guy, but Ashley has many.
Yeah. I just, the thing that bothers me the most is that he's such a fraudster, in my opinion. Like, he's a scammer. First of all, he's a banker. So, he's just like full on scam. Like, this guy is just like, anyways, he's among my least favorite people. And I actually didn't really know much about him until, like, it was in the summer, I think, when they first started saying that Mark Carney was going to replace Justin Trudeau. I think it was in the summertime. And it just like started to go in the news cycle. And that these things are never unintentional, that these are just like testing the waters. And at that time, Mark Carney was like, "Oh, I'll never run. That's not me." Yeah, right. And at that point, I was interested in him. But what kind of really put me onto him was Whitney Webb, who's an independent journalist in Unlimited Hangouts. She's been writing about Mark Carney for a long time, because he's like completely intertwined in like the financial corruption system. So like with BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, and he's like completely wrapped up in that world, and has done a lot of really detrimental things. But most importantly is that he is responsible for essentially creating these like tokenized global carbon markets. And he goes on and on about how he's this climate activist and this climate champion. But what he's actually done is him, along with Mike Bloomberg, who is obviously one of the richest men in the world, those two are the ones who have come up with this Ponzi scheme. And it's just like, when I started looking into it, because I'm so interested in climate and like climate activism and like what actually is being done in the world about climate change, which is virtually nothing. The things that come up the most are these like financialized systems that are supposed to tackle climate change, when in fact, all they do is just like, it creates like a giant pool of money that gets embezzled across the world, right, to fund other projects.
Are you axing the tax? You're talking about carbon tax, among other things.
I fucking hate carbon tax. Yes, I do hate the carbon tax.
She also hates Pierre Poilievre, just for folks who get confused.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not quickly. I am not in any way, shape, or form a climate denialist. Okay, but the fact is that the carbon tax is being used as a financial instrument to funnel money back into the oil and gas industry. And so your taxpayer money, by the way, into the oil and gas industry. Like the Liberal government last year gave $18 billion to the oil and gas industry. They have private-public partnerships all the time where they literally fund these massive like carbon capture and storage, which is not real. It's literally not even a real technology. It generates a little bit of carbon from what they capture in the system. And then the fracking is used for fracking, and these oil and gas industries inject that carbon back into the ground to further their fracking operation. And arguably, it actually is worse for the environment. Because you're not only using fracking to do it, but also it's generating more oil to then put out into the environment. Anyways, it's literally just Kearney. Yeah, it's just a scheme. Anyways, but yeah, Mark.
I feel that's just like a whole tangent we could have just gone off into.
Honestly, it's so wild. It's so wild. Yeah. Once you start looking into it, it's just so wild. But Mark Carney is like a career banker. He started off at Goldman Sachs. He was there for 13 years and then immediately left to join the Bank of Canada, which seems like a crazy conflict of interest. But he was there and he was the associate deputy minister. He was the deputy director of the Bank of Canada. And then he became the associate deputy minister of the Department of Finance with the government of Canada. And then after that, and during that time, he actually oversaw the sale of the small portion of Canadian gas that we own. We own Petro-Canada, right? He was the one who oversaw the sale of our 20% share in Petro-Canada. That was all Mark Carney. And then he became the governor of the Bank of Canada, and then immediately became the governor of the Bank of England. Like, it's wild. Like, this man is a career banker, and it seems like there's so much conflict of interest there.
It's funny you say that because the NDP got fact-checked on their latest post on X. They have a little quip about Petro-Canada being sold off by Carney, and the community notes gave them a gotcha, saying...
he literally oversaw it.
Yeah. Well, community notes, that's the new way of fact checking.
Oh God.
So exactly, they're getting owned on Twitter right now. They need you out there leading their comms, I guess, or helping them out. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I guess if you don't know how government works, he was an associate deputy minister, so he was like technically not a political figure, but they are political appointments. All of those roles, anything that's above like associate deputy minister, like when you're just like, barely
you're still a
bureaucrat in the government.
Yeah,
they're absolutely political appointments. Like I remember, I used to work for the government many years ago, and I remember working in an ADM office and having the ADM being called by the prime minister to tell him that he was getting a political, like he was being promoted to chief statistician or something. So, and the guy was a total tool, so makes sense. But anyway, so he did oversee that, but then. After he left the Bank of England, that's when he was appointed as the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. And he chairs that committee with Mike Bloomberg. And so him and Mike Bloomberg are besties. Like they have been quite literally on the same playing field for the last 5 years. And now, I'm sure most of you know that during 2020, during the pandemic, was the largest wealth transfer in the history of human history, and was strategically designed by Wall Street and by companies like BlackRock and all these massive corporations that essentially controlled pandemic response. And so Mike Bloomberg was a part of that as well. So these guys are like really entrenched in this like financial corruption system. But he also in 2020 was appointed as the finance advisor to Boris Johnson, which is a bizarre thing because he's a liberal, and then he was finance advisor
to across the pond.
Yeah, to go and then be for a conservative prime minister. But also that same year, he was made CEO of Environmental, Social and Governance and Impact Fund Strategy at Brookfield Asset Management, which is a subsidiary of Bloomberg. So like it's also owned by Michael Bloomberg. And in 2021, he became the CEO or the chair of the board of directors for Bloomberg LP. So he also is on the board of directors for Stripe, which is like a massive, like your card system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all of this is kind of wrapped into these like carbon markets. So in 2020, he was also as part of like on this Brookfield Asset Management Group, which manages like $900 billion worth of assets. He created the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. And this task force had members like BlackRock, Bank of America, Bloomberg's New Energy Finance, Boeing, Goldman Sachs. Like, it's all the same people, right?
They're going to back his
but-
campaign like, well, I don't know. Freeland's a big
Hardcore.
friend of these folks too, but not that close. I mean, she's maybe not having, sounds like their kids are all going to the same birthday parties, and he's trying to be
100%.
painted as an outsider. Like, I'm not cheering for Carney, but the whole, I mean, an outsider in terms of like he's outside the working class for sure.
Right,
but
right,
I think he fits
right.
right in with folks we typically elect. But I don't
Yeah.
know. When's the last time we had a banker? This is horrifying because it looks like he'll be the front runner with Freeland. I guess
Yeah.
it's
Agreed.
The closest you had with a banker, I'd say, would be Paul Martin.
that didn't go very long.
Yeah.
But Mark Kearney
Well-
has big friends in big places, which means big money in his
Lots
campaign.
of money, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. But really,
Leadership races aren't cheap now.
no, that's for sure. But I do find, so like the carbon market thing is a really interesting space because essentially once you like even just look at it a little bit, it really is just this giant Ponzi scheme. But what's terrifying about it is that it's been set up as like a way in which to tokenize natural resources, particularly in the global south. So let's say, a city in Africa wants to build solar panels for their community or whatever. They can actually like tokenize the carbon credits from these, from I guess whatever carbon you would save or you would trade. And then these asset management firms, so like BlackRock and State Street and Brookfield, they could potentially buy these carbon credits to offset their own carbon. So like they don't need to lower their emissions by any, but they can still claim that they're net zero because they've spent so much on building infrastructure or building this like green tech. But there's no that we know that banks and these types of asset management funds and these financial people don't ever do things for the benefit of the communities that they're investing in. This is really more likely to be an instrument by which they can manipulate those communities and governments in order to deregulate their industries and open up to privatization, and that they can seize these assets because there's no real groundwork around what does it mean when you've bought these carbon credits. Do you own what you've bought, like when you've made these investments? And what if these, what is the return on them, So It's very ambiguous and it's meant to be that way.
And you were saying earlier, it siphons money, like basically just back into the industry. So knowing this about Carney, it leads a lot to believe that it's just a right-hand swing on the liberals. I mean, they're typically not a lot that separates them from conservatives. We've talked about that. I mean, some of the more awful things do delineate them. But it's clear to see, even if you hear his speech where he announced he will run for the leadership, he attacks the social safety net in his speech. He has previously talked about its importance, especially when he's talking to Jon Stewart and he's slamming Pierre Poilievre and how he would have destroyed the safety net. His first words as he officially enters the race are sounding very much so like the conservatives. And Freeland being the only other option open to liberals right now, because last week, if you tuned in, one of our guests was adamant. Christy Clark was the front runner. She had to bow out because she had been in the Conservative Party and lied about it and then gaslit everybody into thinking, yeah, I just misspoke. Anyway, folks can look into that story on their own. I'm not giving Clark any more air than she deserves, but she's out. She can't even speak French. So on top of all of that nonsense. But I can only imagine like oil and gas are just sitting there going, no matter who wins, we win.
100%. And I think
Joe,
Carney is like,
Yes,
Oh,
sorry. It's to sort of bring it a little bit of sort of a higher view, because the specifics are absolutely, you're absolutely right there, Ash. But it's also, this really gives me a feel of what the Democrats did in the U.S., which is hey, our party's not doing so well. We're going to need to appease. Let's swing to the right. Look, we've got a beggar. This guy's worked with Harper. Let's see, we're the different party now. He's an outsider, and he knows what he's doing with businesses, and he's got all this sort of, well, maybe we should take a look at these social programs, see if we get those votes. And I'm like, that's cool. swinging towards the right didn't work for the Democrats. Are you sure you want to go with this? Because let's be honest here, some of those votes you're going to be trying to fish are just radicalized. We hate everything about Trudeau. They're never going to budge. And so the central is sort of, you've still got your centrist voters, independent, I got other words for them, who are going to be your base that you're going to be trying to vote with. And are you sure this is what they want? Did you ask them, or is this just what you're guessing because of all the other rhetoric you're saying?
Yeah, it's definitely he's definitely on the right wing of the spectrum for sure. But I will tell you the reason why I think that he is running, like that he announced his runningness, or he's going to run for a Liberal candidate. I think he was on the fence before this, and I will tell you why. So he was like making like big money, right? He was the CEO of Brookfield Asset Management. He's apparently resigned from all of these incredibly well-paying jobs. Brookfield Asset Management, Stripe, from the UN envoy, like all of these big ones. And so part of one of his brainchildren, like one of his mastermind projects is essentially he was pulling all these asset management firms into his carbon markets idea, okay? And which Elon Musk also is a huge supporter of, which it goes to show you that this is not a left-right issue. This is literally just a Ponzi scheme. How do we steal from the people kind of scheme?
Elon's like a litmus test. You just don't support anything he supports.
Yeah. Yeah,
Makes it easy.
Elon Musk also loves the carbon tax. Yeah, and like I said, I'm not carbon tax is literally not being used for anything.
He's like the only word he likes the carbon tax. Even the Liberals don't like it. It's such a headache for them now.
I know. So it's called. No, it's okay. I'm trying to find the name of it. It's the Globe. I wrote it down. Where did I write it down? It's the the Glasgow Finance. Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. So that is a subsidiary of came out of the UN Special Envoy group that he's on. And it's also part of the UN 2030 agenda, which by the way is a terrifying agenda. If you actually read it, that is really about kind of globalization of the environment, but not in a good way. It's kind of rolls out things like digital ID, mass surveillance. It's pretty wild. And it's wrapped up in this climate activism, but actually really isn't about climate activism, more about mass surveillance. And so he rolled out this thing. And so part of it was this net zero asset management group that would asset management providers or something like that for net zero. And one of the biggest funders of that, or one of the biggest proponents of that, was the fact that BlackRock was part of it. And BlackRock owns $15 trillion worth of assets. But just 3 days ago, BlackRock pulled out. BlackRock said, we're not doing it anymore. And that I think is going to cause, I don't know, but I think that's going to cause a cascading effect in that, he's going to he would have been fired from his job because that was literally his entire job at Brookfield Asset Management was essentially to create these climate positive initiatives, net zero initiatives. And he was relying on other asset management groups. And if BlackRock pulls out, essentially it stopped. I think it was I saw an article about it just a couple of days ago, and it said that they because ahead of the Trump inauguration, U.S. banks abandoned Mark Carney climate initiative. So I think literally he's probably scrambling to try and find a way out of this chaos that he's about to get trapped in. And what better way than to just resign from all of your responsibilities?
It'll be an interesting race indeed.
Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, feed this to the opposition, but it's not like I want Freeland to win either. I'm not going to spend much. We're going to move on to the next topic now, but maybe we'll come back next week and shit on Freeland after she announces. Because I have a list of coups we could talk about. And
oh my God,
all the reasons why she would be horrific. And it would start to boil down to Freeland and Polyev. And I don't actually know what is the lesser evil. And a master banker, Carney. So for fuck's sakes, Canadian politics.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of going to be the losers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, we also, this particular leadership race with the Liberals, I'm still going with just having seen the habits when it comes to when the leader steps down,
Oh,
the party tends not to get reelected.
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
That, and we're like,
Yeah.
in the internal silencing that goes on, that, you know, where nobody will critique their party, like during the race, yeah, all gloves are off, they're going to talk smack about one another, but then, you know, let's say Jagmeet or the Liberals, they get a brand refresh, right? Ontario Liberals got to do this and had a whole new lifespan out of it, though. But yeah, it's often a get out of jail free card for the party. So, like, will they still be the face of the genocide if they have a leader who wasn't part of the government during? Like, will he be able to just wash his hands of even all the liberal mistakes made? Probably. That's how short our memories are as Canadian.
We're goldfish.
We are, but we're peaceful goldfish with really great health care, and apparently Blackhawks patrolling our border. That was the best transition you're going to get out of me today, but let's go on to the next topic here. This made me mad, and this is one of those, like, not enough people are talking about it, but at the same time I'm also glad they're not talking about it, because it's xenophobia and military state all rolled into one. And I know folks out there are just going to be celebrating this. So what am I talking about? The RCMP have taken possession. They're leasing them. That sounds so lame. First of all, talk about feeling like the 51st state or whatever. We're leasing their helicopters to patrol our borders. They are also buying 60 more drones, which they have hundreds of drones now that they use, and they're going to build surveillance towers. So the Liberals went real xenophobe police state on their way out. And again, another kind of capitulation to the right, things they can say that they did while they were in office to try to steal some of those conservative votes over, and also just to scapegoat the hell out of migrants still. So it's like, that's another $1.3 billion poured into border security. And when they're interviewed, they're not even trying to talk about like firearms or drugs or terrorists or all the usual talking points. It's just migrants. It's just illegal crossings that they're bragging about lowering through their visa program changes, their restrictions, and now Black Hawk helicopters. Man, of all the helicopters, too, can you think of being somebody fleeing state violence as a refugee and trying to cross the border? And we've seen families freeze to death trying to do this. This maybe not the Mexican-U.S. border where you have like hundreds of deaths of people trying to brave the elements and all the barriers put up to make it harder for them. But it's still not an easy thing to do. It's perilous. It's exploitive. And now there's going to be Blackhawks circling you. Anyway,
What do they intend
I
to
mean,
do
I've
with
got a
these
lot to
Black
say about
Hawks?
it. Anybody want to jump in before I take up all the space?
A good question. Yeah, what are they planning to do with the Blackhawks? I have no idea. I saw one of the videos there that was where they were discussing it. Yeah, the increase in drones. I'm like, all right, that's not overly surprising because, as you pointed out, you're absolutely right. We have drones, we have monitoring, we have electronic monitoring of the border. But and again, yeah, what the hell would you do with the Blackhawks? The first thing that I'm thinking about when I'm hearing all this announcement and all this sort of just literally just money thrown the whole thing, I'm like, is this just because we're appeasing Trump? Because he was whining about our border? Like, he's whining about our border, which is for him to secure, not for Canada, in regards to people going into the U.S.? Like, is that why we're leasing and firing up drones to make sure people aren't going into the U.S.? Why are we doing their job? Why are we paying to do their job?
Are they making a profit off that at least? Are we
that
actually,
too.
is that a new business the U.S. is in? They're going to just supply us the means to militarize our border and we will gladly pay them?
What do you think that the entire demand of Trump saying you need to increase your spending? Where do you think we're going to be spending our money?
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of that surveillance tech also comes from Israel, right? Like, a lot of that stuff is what's been tried and tested in Palestine, and now it's coming here. People don't realize how incredibly like these things happen. When they happen in Palestine, they happen here too.
You
Just
want
takes a
military
little bit of
weapons, you go to the U.S. You want policing weapons, you go to Israel. That's what the world does.
Everyone
Yeah,
just knows this, right, Joe?
surveillance.
If you're a cop, you
Yeah.
just know this. If you're a warmonger,
Yeah.
you know where to go to get all the goods. But yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
it's, and that's not even the whole price tag. I think what was $1.3 billion. That's just this year added into the budget. I don't know what it already is. I should have looked that up before we come on, but I didn't. It's probably atrocious. But also, like, you're leasing helicopters that need maintenance. We've gone into maintenance of militarized vehicles before in Canada, and we don't do well. So that
Cheap
usually
either.
ends up costing you a lot more. And it's the price tag that they can't give you at the onset. So we can't gripe about it now, but just know it'll be big. But in writing this story, I'm talking, I get mad about the helicopters and police spending. Shout out to Olivia Chow for increasing the Toronto police budget again. Like, I know there's other things. We'll unpack that another time, but it's
Toronto's got increased spending. Ottawa's getting horses.
They don't
Ottawa's
already have
getting
horses. They
horses?
can't borrow the
Ottawa's getting
RCMP's horses or
Where are they going to keep
Parliament
these
Hill.
horses?
Nobody
Parliament
knows.
Hill. Oh my.
Nobody
What,
knows.
are they
But we're
going to
getting
keep this in
horses.
center block?
Yeah, I'm not sure
That's
where we're
wild.
going to be keeping the horses,
Ashley's
but
worried about where they're going. Ashley lives on a farm. That's why she's concerned
That
where
is
the horses will be staying. I'm worried about what they'll be doing. But
100%.
also
I-
save
But
the
they'll also
animals.
be victims of this whole process, So
Yes, same with police dogs. I saw a video like police don't deserve dogs, and then it showed riot dogs, and I was like, okay, it was a great
Yeah.
video. I should share it with folks. I don't know if I did or not, but let me go back to the point. Like, the concept of borders, right, is on top of all of this other talk, and we don't really unpack that a lot on the show. It's implied. My disdain for nationalism comes across, I think, a lot. And most of the guests that we talk about explain why nationalism is so dangerous. But I said it last week too. Trump even admitted the idea of borders is just arbitrary lines drawn. And I think the idea of spending so much to militarize them is dangerous on that front as well. It reinforces that nationalist identity. It reinforces this delineation between peoples that doesn't really exist. And it's just, I think a lot of people don't understand where borders came from, and it was just like this little interesting lesson I got in university, and I'm going to streamline it for you. Okay, so I don't want all these comments on how it wasn't entirely accurate. It's like real streamline, but back in and this is totally Eurocentric, because it's a Eurocentric idea to draw these kinds of lines. So back in the day, you would be on your farm, Ashley, and you would pay money to the church, and you would pay it to like some lord fucker and the king. And they would each have, like, think of all these radiating circles of power. So, the church, and however many people are close to that cathedral, they belong to that church. But then they also belong to this lord's realm, and they will owe, money and dues or whatever. And then the king will have a larger realm, and they will be conflicting circles of power. And then once centralized power became more needed and popular, you needed a way to then make sure you knew that even though you might be closer to this king, your allegiance is with this one. And so for taxation purposes, for building army purposes, none of the purposes were good for like the people. And we still hold on to this idea that was created by the most powerful players at the time to grow their realms. And we treat it like beyond biblical, like some folks just, even the most progressive folks sometimes are just like, I'm just so proud to be Canadian, and they just don't allow their mind to even challenge that idea of borders. So I just wanted to throw that tidbit in there while we can shit on the cops and all of the reasons why the RCMP should not have Blackhawks. It's like, why we shouldn't have fireworks too as well. Like, these are war machines. But also, why are we militarizing the border? Why are we stopping only the flow of poor people? Money will get you across the border. It will get you citizenship easier, not just like illegally, like it part of the point system, and you can pay to have a different level of citizenship by investing, and goods flow across, no problem. Money flows across, no problem. The only thing they're trying to stop is the flow of poor folks. So like never are these borders in our benefit. So open them up.
Yeah, I mean, we have always maintained this impression of and pride in the idea of the largest undefended land border. Like that was our big thing that we were always sort of saying. And here we are, like, yeah, largest undefended land border
We used to brag about
with
that.
drones and Blackhawks.
Yeah, you're right.
But like,
Alright.
also, like, I guess, what are they driving these? Like, are they going to shoot people with these helicopters? Like, what are they planning to do with it? Is it like surveillance? Like, to me, it's just a weird thing to
I think
just
it's
like,
just a show.
yeah.
Like, I mean, how many Blackhawks we were supposed to get? Like, I think 6 or 12.
Yeah,
Like,
and they're
that's not a
like,
lot.
it's not, and I think it's like Joe said, just for show and surveillance.
Mhm.
But you know,
Yeah.
I wouldn't put anything past them because they're really starting joint operations. That's kind of
Yeah.
like a footnote in some of the articles that talk about the Blackhawks because that's sexier, Black Hawk Down. But they're like in the same building. They're going to build buildings. They're all going to work together, and you're going to start clearing people on the U.S. side of the border. They do it in airports a lot and whatnot, but they're bragging, we're going to be the first country ever to basically mix our border patrols together. So it's got that 51st state feels to it.
Yeah.
It sure
my
does. We like to laugh and stuff about all of that, but there's a lot of wheels in motion and yeah, that's just
Laugh
one
so
of
you don't
them.
see the tears.
No. The Blackhawks. You want to talk about TikTok next, Joe? Or we can talk about mining. Yeah, give my breath. I'm going to go into Barrick Mines, Barrick Gold, after Joe talks about the TikTok ban. Are you on TikTok, Joe?
I am on TikTok.
I am-
I've been on there quite a bit. I've been doing a fair amount of chats there with some individuals in the lives. It was actually kind of funny, guys, as you were mentioning around, the idea of like borders are artificial. I actually used that argument this week once or twice with a couple of very right-wing people. And when you use that argument with them, boom, their heads explode. And they're like, oh my God, what do you mean? How dare you even infer that? You're an idiot, you crazy. Like, the rhetoric just goes nuts. Like, it almost feels like the program script just derailed and they're not sure where to go, like they're looking through it kind of thing.
They don't know where
It's
you are in the
crazy.
spectrum anymore. They can't even find you. The
Yeah.
needle buried on them, right? They're just like,
Yeah. Oh, you're
But do
unreasonable.
people
I
not
can't talk to
realize-
you. That's
you're
it.
the kind of people
Yeah,
my
like, do
parents
people
warned
not
me about.
realize that like countries have broken apart, like USSR, Yugoslavia, like those borders completely changed. I went to Croatia. We went to Croatia, my husband and I, about 5 years ago, and Dubrovnik, which is like where everybody goes in Croatia, is not attached to the rest of Croatia by any type of landmass. So you have to go through at least one other country to get from Dubrovnik to the rest of Croatia. And you think like that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, but that is the way that they drew the borders. They made them up after the
Imagine
fall
a
of
lot of
Yugoslavia.
blood went into creating that border.
We've got a small chunk of U.S. wrapped by Canada on the other side of, I think it's Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
Like there's it's just the way that border was drawn, because again, it was kind of drawn. And we're going back to the border, but back to the TikTok ban. So news of today, Supreme Court, and it just came out a couple hours ago here. The Supreme Court announced that they are, Supreme Court says TikTok can be banned in the U.S., leaving its future in limbo. So right now it looks like as of the 19th, TikTok will be banned in the U.S. And what this means, if they go ahead with everything else, is the app will get pulled from the store, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be inaccessible. If you still have TikTok on your phone, it'll still work. Maybe. More than likely, some of the other things will stop working too, which is the business itself, which means the TikTok Creator Fund will be gone, as well as the TikTok store will probably end rather shortly after that. There's also the looming threat that TikTok themselves says, if you shut us down in the US, we're just going to shut down all the servers there, which is potential for them to do, in which case the entire service goes offline and it's no longer available for the Americans. Will continue, but it'll just become like social media Cuba. No Americans. But there is this also goes into So many additional things, and that's what I'd love to go into here. So one of them being, is this going to eventually happen in Canada? We've already got a partial ban in regards to businesses who were kicked out of the country, but TikTok is still running. We're not banning TikTok, just the business itself. Two, there's a lot of question in regards to if this was, and I've already got opinions in regards to whether or not this is true. People are viewing TikTok as like, was it really for the information being in the Chinese hands, or was there something else shady in there? And I'm voting shady.
I think both. There's always room for
yeah.
red baiting, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like people are genuinely
Absolutely.
fear China. Like they don't understand why. Even same reason they think Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, because they saw it in a movie and suddenly Americans said so.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has kind of been an interesting discovery, particularly if you start looking and listening to the people who have joined Red Note, the Chinese version of TikTok, as they're called. It's built by the Chinese government, which is entertaining as hell. The fact that millions of American former TikTok users have jumped ship from TikTok over to Red Note. So it's like, no, you're concerned about Chinese might get our government. Here it is. We're giving it to them directly. So now it's in your hands. And then since then, they've been mixing, because the way the algorithm of Red Note works, it's not as complex as TikTok. So Chinese people and Americans have been forced to interact, and they've been doing it for a while, and it's been educational to the Americans, which is fascinating, because they're like, we've been taught to not trust you and to hate you. And so now they're just, the average citizens in both countries are just communicating in regards to what's life there, what's life over here.
That's American power's worst nightmare.
It is.
It's like you might as well be talking to Russians, man, or North Koreans.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't do that.
There are lots of Russians on Red Note as well. I am on Red Note, and there are lots of Russians, because there's a real camaraderie between Russians and the Chinese. So it's going to be a real wide awakening for a lot of Americans.
It is, absolutely. But I mean, like the two parts of this, one of them, there's a concern about the Chinese interference, or China getting access to the information, which is like, yeah, that really worked well, that banning. But the second thing now also is, I'm sorry, I'm still going to say that the private social media companies decided not to innovate, particularly Meta and Instagram. They could not compete with TikTok. And having been on TikTok and having been on Instagram, I'm like, there is a large difference in regards. So you can see what they did in TikTok, how they've changed, even in the short time period I was on there, how they've improved and changed things over time, and even opened up the platform in regards to things like extensions and enhancements, and just the custom little widgets. Like you can get the cat face, you can get this and get that. You don't have any of those on TikTok. And they open it up so that people can make their own. Plus the monetization and everything else. And Instagram not doing anything to decide to lobby to just like, no, let's get it out of the way so we don't have to compete. I'm like, well, that's not capitalism. No, it's just cronyism.
It is.
Or is it capitalism? Yeah,
It is. It's not the guise of capitalism, and the hand is not invisible, and the market doesn't decide shit. But it's also the Creators Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Folks were, I didn't fact check this, but so I won't even bother spouting the numbers, but you're talking about like billions of dollars in money coming into the United States that's not going to large corporations. Yep. It's going directly into the hands of like the smallest mom and pop shop type scenario you can think of. It's sometimes just creators at home with the bare necessities able to generate a revenue. And there's
livelihoods being ended because of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Livelihoods.
Yeah. And like the reach that people got, the connections that they were able to make, especially, being in a pandemic right now, this is still a large form of communication for people, lies in social media and how people can, get out there. It proverbially, or virtually rather, but it is disheartening, but something else will pop up, another platform will exist, and like, yeah, Joe's point to Red Door, it's just like handing right, it's almost like out of spite, Oh yeah, you don't want us on TikTok? Oh yeah, it's like something my kids would do. Then I'm going on Red Door. So now they've got to
It
do
is a
that.
very friendly environment. I will say, I enjoy Red Note. It's like more like what TikTok was in like the 2020s when everybody joined in. You know, it's like a lot of like cat and dog videos and very aesthetically pleasing stuff. No dancing, thank God. But there's lots of like it's very aesthetically charming, and people like, and the engagement on it is really, but like you post something and within like seconds you have like 20, 30, 40 comments. Like people really engage with the content on there, which is, I think, it's appealing to a lot of people. I like it. I actually prefer it to, like, if I'm looking for something and I want to doom scroll for a bit, I'm going to go on Red Note versus going on to TikTok. It's a little happier, you know?
Now you have me sold. I'm definitely, after we get off the live, I'm going to check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still up in the air too. Biden, you know, he is, well, I don't know what he does. He doesn't know what he does, but he's going to hand it over to Trump. So the ruling says it can be banned, meaning the proposed legislation is legal in their eyes, and it will be up to Trump on how to possibly implement a ban and what that will look like, or his administration, led by a bunch of oligarchs. Again, another episode, but let's talk about the last topic before we get into our updates. I was really happy to do these notes. Okay. It was really just a little bottom of my ticker came across and I said, what? Oh, I like that. I bookmarked it and I sat down this morning. I'm going to unpack it because I knew it would be good news. So let's get into it. Barrick Gold. For folks who don't know Barrick Gold, it's a Toronto-based mining company. And when we talk about Canadian mines, we are all about mining. It's like that little part of our Canadian identity that we love to take in, the like quadrillions of revenue. I don't know my numbers. I'm not an economist, but like our so much revenue, but we don't really like to brag about it a lot. Why? Because those mining companies are pieces of shit with huge, long records of human rights abuses. That human rights abuses doesn't even sum up how horrible our mining companies are in Africa, in South America in particular. And so when I read the headline that Barrick Gold had to stop operations in Mali after their gold was seized, I was like really joyful on the inside, and we need good news. So 3 tons of their gold. So that's like $245 million, in case folks like gold is fucking heavy. Anyway, because 245, maybe I put an M instead of a B. Anyway, it's lots. And more importantly, it isn't so much the seizure, because, you know, Mali claims Barrick owes them a whole lot of money. And so they're just going to take it. A judge ordered the seizure. It's not like it's just some dictator deciding he was going to do it. Now, this isn't a comment on Mali's government. However, a judge ordered it and it was done. And this shut down operations in a mine that constitutes 14% of Barrick's money. Amazing. Right? Like their annual gold comes from this mine. So they are freaking out. And also the CEO, Mark Bristow, a real winner, a South African who sold off his mining company when apartheid ended. Anyway, so Barrick bought his company. He becomes the CEO of Barrick, one of the world's leading pieces of shit. There is an arrest warrant out for him. The Mali government will arrest him on site. Money laundering, I think, is the charge. I don't know what. He probably just will never see that, but it's just fun to know that he does have a warrant out for his arrest for folks who are doing the work here, trying to hold mining companies accountable. Mining Watch Canada is one of the places you can start to learn more about the atrocities committed by Canadian mining companies. But yeah, so they're getting kicked out of Mali. And it's not just Barrick. It's all imperialists. They are cozying up to Russia, and there's no arguing about that. Oh, well, there is arguing about that, but we're not going to do that right now about whether Russia's imperialist or not. However, they kicked out France as well. So about 2 years ago, they kicked out French troops. And they're like the 6th, well, they weren't the 6th, but there's been about 6 countries in Africa now that have removed French troops that are pushing back against imperialism. Why are there troops there? The troops will tell you they're there to protect against Al-Qaeda and other Islamic insurgent groups. that is neither here or there. They are there for the resource extraction, and they are getting
Makes
kicked
investments.
out. Yeah, and I mean that is capitalism, that is imperialism. Anyway, it's always done on the guise of security or civilizing. We have a lot of different approaches, but it's all the same thing. It's all a farce. It's there to take their resources. So of this mine, what is it? Barrick gets 80% of what's extracted, leaving Mali with only 20% of their natural resource of the gold that they extract there. 20%. Mali. And like you're talking about one of the most equitable companies that exists. And so just getting richer and richer off the back of Africans. We have seen this before. So enough is enough. A lot of countries are fighting back, and it's being sold as, they're bowing to Islamic extremists, or they are siding with the Russians. That's how you'll read most of the articles, especially the financial ones. But, it is heartening to see resistance like that, even if what comes up to replace it isn't perfect. But
Gotta start somewhere.
you do. Because, there's a lot of people here in Canada, going to the whole blueprints of disruption theme, working on trying to hold these people accountable. Because what happens where they are, like in Mali and in Tanzania, is one of the examples I'll have, is they act really horribly. Like, they have security forces that murder people, murder activists openly, raid villages, burn it to the ground, like the most horrible things that you can think of, rig elections, manipulate power in that country, all kinds of stuff. And they have no recourse. The governments where they are usually beholden to them. They're relying on the industry, or they're dirty pieces of shit too. It happens. And they don't get tried. Yeah, they don't get tried in their country. So they come to Canada or the UK, and they launch lawsuits. And that is where a lot of folks are trying to get some accountability. And there has been some success there, even though a recent case in Ontario, in October, the Ontario Superior Court threw it out. But it was Indigenous folks from Tanzania, from one of the mines that Barrick started to focus on when they started to lose Mali. They started to really put their thumb down on the workers in this Tanzanian mine, and they fought back. They've been able to get settlements out of UK courts. Barrick settled out of court, but through cases that were initiated in the UK. And so there is progress there. But that's a lot of things that people don't talk about in terms of Canadian businesses. We know the things that we have and we do, and we don't talk about mining a lot. But yeah, I don't know if you guys want to talk about anything there. But 60% of global mining, did you folks know that? I mean,
I know that we've had a huge amount of problems with when it comes to mining, and not just specifically in Canada. I mean, we can go discuss, Congo and cobalt mines in the Congo, and it's, our dependence, and when I say our dependence, the world dependence in regards to cobalt, and how we will allow horrible conditions like Congo just to get that, so that we can get the latest cell phone, or just technology on there. And it's not to ignore the fact that, well, you're using technology. Yes, we're kind of dependent on it. But there's nothing that stops us from also trying to advocate to get better conditions, especially for those, for those involved. Sorry, Ashley.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that this actually ties back to the global carbon markets too, because part of the tokenization of natural resources is tokenization of mining industry and stuff. So you might just see a switch of individuals owning mines to these massive asset management groups actually owning the mines, imposing the same type of conditions, right? They're not going to change the way they do capitalism, but just a different ownership. And that is a huge threat to the global south for sure. Not just mining of natural resource, actual carbon, and mining of diamonds and gold and things like that, but also logging and mining of and just forests, and you can people's actual oceans and natural environments, those things becoming tokenized and then owned by these massive corporations. So it's definitely all intertwined.
Agreed.
Yeah, there's probably a lot about Canadian industry that we could learn about. The mining industry is just one of them. You've taught me about the carbon before because I watch you on TikTok, so I had an idea. But I think and I don't like the carbon tax either, but for other reasons now it's, I feel solidified. But the more you talk about, the more you feel like sometimes you're feeding into right-wing talking points because they're all about axe the tax. So it's like, oh, hell.
Yeah.
Because they won't replace it with anything, right? So it's like,
no.
Shit, even when we talk about the carbon tax, we're really not even talking about the environment half the time. We're talking economics, which is...
I mean, the basic concept I've always understood about the carbon tax, and I mean, and this is where I want to go take a look at Ashley's videos to learn a little bit more about the problems with the carbon tax. Because again, I have no problems with ending the carbon tax, as most of the provinces were capable of doing it and replacing it with something else that would address specifically, the problems like cap and trade goes far more after the industries that are causing pollution. But yeah, I mean, we definitely need to do something about it. Carbon tax is not obviously the perfect solution. I want to know a little bit more in regards to why. But yeah, and if there is a better way, by all means, let's push for it because...
Well, I mean, the better way is just to cut emissions, but our government does not do that. Essentially, the carbon tax is essentially just they're like scapegoat between like, we're doing something for the environment and the climate when actually they're not doing anything because emissions in Canada have risen year over year. So we've actually are in much worse place today than we were before the carbon tax. So it's literally just been a money funneling system for them to legitimize or try to appease the climate concern that exists in the country while not actually doing anything meaningful. And that's been the criticism of most climate activists who actually look at countries that impose climate taxes. Like, does it actually reduce your emissions? And the answer is no. And so what's the point? Because the only thing that matters is reducing emissions. So
well, this is where I thought it was kind of interesting because I thought it was in regards to, I saw some numbers where it was bringing it down. And the second thing, I thought it was an interesting kind of motivator because I was viewing it as the same way as the taxes on cigarettes. You crank up the price, and it motivates you to go find a cheaper alternative, which should be greener, hence no carbon tax on it. So, trying to make the market difference of I can buy this power, which is going to be using fossil fuels, which is going to be as an option. And it's going to have carbon tax, making it far more expensive versus the solar and wind, which is much cheaper. And if that's not what we're getting,
if you have a choice, it might work. But like I live rural, I have no choice as to use propane, But I think the problem is that we as individuals don't actually contribute to the amount of carbon that is being emitted like by our country per se. It's corporations and it's oil and gas industry, it's aviation, and those things are not at all affected by a carbon tax. In many cases, they're subsidized and given, tax breaks and given subsidies to fund these, like I said, green projects that actually are not anything. Like carbon capture and storage is not a real thing. Neither is like air sequestration. They talk about that a lot. That's not real.
The carbon capture I viewed as it's just a big pause button. You're just like, yeah, it's gonna be somebody else's problem in the future. Yeah, that's not good either. But sorry, what was the second one you mentioned?
So they claim that there's a technology called air sequestration. So basically like where they can pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. Yeah, that's not real. That's like something that they've invested like billions of dollars in, and they still have absolutely there's like one technology, like there's one little facility somewhere in like Iceland, and it like captures enough carbon for like the 10 cars or something like that. Like they can't scale it. So yeah, it's wild. Like there's no scalable effort for it. And so they keep talking about these solutions. Same was like in COP26 and stuff. They talk about like these futuristic ideas that it's going to like, take the carbon out of the atmosphere because the carbon that's in the atmosphere is here. We can't do anything about it, right? Like it's going to exist in the atmosphere for the next, 100 years or whatever. So, the only way to actually like reduce or like get us back towards, a baseline or a reasonable baseline to avoid really catastrophic climate change would be to take the carbon out of the air. And now we do have natural things that do that. It's trees, obviously.
The ocean.
But
I remember that from school.
Yeah. Just, small things. But again, like you would need to reforest. And we are at a point now where like there's so many tipping points happening all at the same time that like forests, like the boreal forest, is carbon neutral at this point because of the forest fires. It emits as much carbon as it absorbs. I think there's only one carbon sink left in the world, and it's in the Congo Basin. So it's like that's it. Like the Amazon is neutral now too. So you have all these tipping points that we're hitting. But the point is that they are trying to use technology as a way to mitigate the worst effects of climate catastrophe, and that and these technologies are unproven. They're just not real. And there's a lot of investment, public funds being invested into them that are just being wasted instead of doing meaningful things like, actually working towards cutting carbon emissions, and doing things that are meaningful. They don't do that. Instead, they invest all our money, all our public funds back into these sham projects because the money just gets recycled, right? Oil and gas is just going to pump that money back into those politicians, back into those campaigns and their political.
Well, not
parties,
all of it.
so.
They get to keep us. They get to keep some.
They get to keep a lot of it. Yeah. But yeah, it's
up.
really, really shady, unfortunately, when you start to look into like actual climate change policy and all of these like sham organizations. Like COP is not really anything. Even anything that's come out of it has been not real. Like maybe 30 years ago, they were meaning to do well, but currently there's really there's no path forward for combating climate change that doesn't involve like drastic reduction in emissions, which is not going to happen under capitalism. There's no way. So depressing.
We're supposed to end on a good note. Okay.
Sorry. It's really depressing.
It has to be said. But that leads us to the whole purpose of the podcast, Blueprints of Disruption especially, is there is a path forward. It's people power. It's like resistance and overthrowing these systems. So, I mean, that's why we aim to inform during the Rabble Rants. But the ultimate purpose of the content that at least that I create there is geared to allowing folks to be okay with what Ashley said, that the political answers that you have in front of you, none of them are answers. And that's okay because you are free now. You are free of worrying about the carbon tax and all of that because you're just organizing your community right now and you're banding together and you're creating networks. And we will get there, but yeah, it's maddening to hear because like you think of how many people put in effort into some of these policies, thinking maybe they were doing good or sold the idea that this was meaningful. Some of them know exactly what they're doing, but it's a lot of wasted energy sometimes. So, I'm going to transition into the disruptive updates though, because it's about that time, and I'm looking through my notes and I realize I usually have some better updates. Some of these are not great. Like they're hard to hear, but we need to know about them, right? So I told you about the Globe and Mail getting shut down. That was good. But you've heard us talk about the international students holding it down in Brampton. They have had an encampment over there. And if you didn't know, now you are hearing for the first time, they've had an encampment there since August 30th. So I know they marked 100 days. My math is really poor. It was more than 100 days. We got an email from them just yesterday, and they are putting a pause on the encampment. The reason being the proroguing of Parliament. It is very cold. It is a lot to ask people to maintain an encampment in Ontario in the winter, in Canada in the winter. And so rather than maybe waste that energy that is so precious, they are shifting tactics. And, as organizers, mostly like that's who we talk to here. They were a really interesting group who focuses on self-advocacy and self-organizing. There's not like an umbrella group that comes in and like saves everybody. It's really from the ground up, and their initiatives are decided by what they're ready for and what they want to do. And they have done a lot of work there, and they've really grown. Their press releases were on point. They rallied people all the time to keep coming down there. They made a lot of alliances with labor. I just want to read a little bit of the statement that they sent out when they told the news of the pause, and we're encouraging people to join a town hall this Sunday in Brampton to talk about what the next steps could be, because they don't know them yet, because they'll be decided by a collective. I know, right? This is very unique for some people who deal with other kinds of politics and even union organizing and stuff. So yes, it's very actual grassroots. So they say since starting their encampment this past August 30th, it has been a transformative space that has brought together affected student workers, built their capacity to self-organize, shifted the narrative in the community, and won the recent policy change to the LMIA program, whereby employers are no longer incentivized to sell bonded labor contracts for extra PR points. That is a really complicated way of saying they did secure a bit of a victory, because what they are there trying to do is draw attention to the postgraduate work program for the most part, which was some of the changes in the visas that I was talking about the Liberals did, that is going to exile folks from Canada, people who have learned here and worked here and built families and friends and community, become part of the community, and they are going to have to leave. He's making it harder and harder for folks to stay in the country. And now it'll be even harder for them to even come here. But postgraduate work programs are permits are hard to get, and now they're near impossible. So they did have some victory there, but I think the way that they explained it is like the way the people grew in the encampment, and the skills they've gained and the networks that they've created will allow them to take it to the next step. So it's sort of like the student encampments, where we get a little bit sad, disappointed when they have to be torn down, but they serve a purpose, right? It's not an open-ended thing. So I like from reading what they had to write, and we'll see where they go from here. But it seems like they did gain a lot of value from that encampment. But over 100 days, that's pretty impressive. So if you didn't know about them, you do now. And tell someone about them, because they did work to gain as much traction as possible. But yeah, another update that we have is a disappointing one, even though I did kind of twist that last one into it. It ended up being a good one. But we had a guest on, Sky Johnson, from a local, we interviewed a whole bunch of community groups, Palestinian solidarity community groups. They've gone riding by riding here in Toronto. That's generally how they've organized themselves. But she came on with the group of different community members there. But she told her story of being arrested after taping pieces of paper to the window of a Starbucks. And I'm just going to refresh people on her case just for a second. You may have seen, it was really early on. I think it was October or November of last year. So early on in the genocide. And it got a lot of airplay. You saw a Starbucks with caution or police tape wrapped around it. Her name was splashed all over the right-wing mags and newspapers. And, if you Google her name, it's not a good return for her, And it was from taping pieces of paper on windows. And what the police did is they showed up. They basically told this came from somebody who sat through the court case and informed me. The police showed up and told Starbucks, hey, we can clean this up pretty quick and have you reopened, no problem. And something between that and within an hour or so, the forensics team was called in, which means the store was shut down all day, which means the mischief charge facing Sky was increased and made more serious. A funny note, the judge asked them, why did you call a forensics team for something like this? And they said, it was a training exercise. It was a training exercise. We just brought them in for training. We know that that's bullshit, because we've documented here, thanks to all of the sources we have and the people we've interviewed, incredible tactics by the Toronto police, under Project Resolute, backed by prosecutors in the Attorney General's office. Joe, one day, is going to talk even more about that. From a firsthand perspective, but they just went after her with everything they got, and they unfortunately did get a conviction. I'm not sure if she has been sentenced or what is facing her now, but that was just at the end of December, just before Christmas, so it's a bit of a late update, but Yeah, so that's really disappointing. We have seen some of the charges dropped, and against Palestinian solidarity activists in Toronto specifically. That's where I get my updates from. And the trend there is, if there's police encounters where the police have overstepped their bounds, as they usually do, and assaulted people, there's body cam footage. Those charges seem to be easier to navigate because the Crown doesn't really want a lot of that stuff to come to light. But it's the cases where there was really no police interaction that are, at least like from the onset, you know, Sky was prosecuted, I think, because on social media, like, she copped to doing this. It was a post, not that like a cop grabbed her and tussled with her. And so that's the trend that's occurring in Toronto. There's way more to unpack there, and we're going to bring in some lawyers from the movement, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, to talk about the different charges that are facing people and how they're going through the system, as well as what it means to be a movement lawyer. So folks that are out there, not any lawyer is a good lawyer if you get arrested for something like this.
There's a massive difference. It's very important to learn that difference. So definitely watch that episode.
Yeah, it's coming together, but I appreciate that, Joe, because yeah, he could understand from a firsthand perspective that there is a difference in how these are being dealt with, not just by lawyers, like good lawyers, but how the Crown is dealing with these cases compared to how they would deal with other cases of trespass or mischief or whatnot. But it was really upsetting to hear her story. I believe she was 19 when she was charged, and she had crazy bail conditions put on her right from the start, like curfews which messed up her job, and it was just wholly unnecessary for considering what she'd done. So yeah, and then the last two updates that I have are direct actions that are happening. Folks are going to have to go online to get the details for this one. I'm sorry, but Melissa Lanceman is holding, she's speaking at an event in Hamilton, and there are a lot of folks trying to shut it down. If you follow Rabbi David Misavar, he might have the details there. It's this weekend. I believe it's Saturday or Sunday. Ironically, she's talking about combating anti-Semitism. And folks are trying to appeal to Andrea Horwath to shut it down or whatnot. I don't know how you feel about those tactics. It doesn't really matter. But if folks want to join those efforts, that is in Hamilton this weekend. And also, we talked about a ceasefire from at the very onset of this Rabble Rants, but it's important that you know that folks are still out there. No one has actually taken a deep breath like I had hoped. They are still going at it hard. They were out at the embassies mostly yesterday, at the Zionist embassies or the U.S. embassies or consulates, depending on what city you were in. Really good numbers showed up despite the weather. Today, I know, Kitchener's having a vigil. If folks check the Palestinian Youth Movement, as well as Independent Jewish Voices and Jews Say No to Genocide. World Against War is another people you should be following, mostly on Instagram, to know when all these direct actions are going to happen. But on the 18th, there is a big march in Toronto. So that is tomorrow, Saturday, the 18th. Folks are marching against Trump. It's the People Against Trump march. Anyway, it's happening. But more importantly, there is a Palestinian contingent. So if you want to be a part of that, they ask that you meet at University and Armory at 11:30, so that you can form it. Because there'll be a lot of things people be really mad at Trump about, and nobody generates marches quite like Trump, honestly. Like the Women's March when he was president was massive. Everyone had the pussy ears, the pussycat hats. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not saying that right, but anyway, we made some in this house as well, and I think we went down there. But I did go down there. But someone asked me on the last show, like if we can find any positivity coming out of a Trump administration. I mean, besides a possible ceasefire and maybe a reprieve from TikTok. I don't know, but it's that the mask comes off. Folks feel obliged to get out there where they would have not marched against Biden, perhaps, for some reason. So if it does anything, it does kind of take the gloves off, as would a Polyev administration as well. So if you're looking on the bright side, that is the bright side, and that there's lots of people that are out there mobilizing their communities, big and small.
Absolutely.
One last shout out before I let you folks sign off. If anybody is in the harm reduction or safe consumption advocacy circles, and they can help secure supplies for rural Alberta and Saskatchewan, please get in touch with me. You can reach the show at bpofdisruption@gmail.com, or you can reach out on all the social media. I will respond. Folks need shipments. They are unable to get supplies to parts of rural Saskatchewan and Alberta right now. And I have asked, they've asked if I could help. So anybody hearing that, please reach out. One last note, it was in the comments, just a reminder, because we did mention pandemic. It is ongoing. Please mask up. Thank you, Ashley and Joe. What do you got to say to folks? It's Friday. We've ranted. Do we feel better?
We feel not too bad. I just wanted to also add, as well as Toronto having their having rallies, Ottawa is also going to have a rally on the 18th. It is for Gaza Lives for Palestine. It's actually a car rally, which kind of surprised me. It's going to be Saturday the 18th at 11 a.m. at Riverview Park and Ride, and it is in the Manitic area, so it's a bit of an unusual one.
Oh.
And but this is the activity for that's their Saturday. I believe there might also be one on Sunday. I don't have the info for it, but they did have a rally yesterday. So Ottawa tends to get pretty active and frequent. There's some good and bad parts of it, but maintain and see if you can show up for sure.
Pat King won't be there. It's not that
Pat
kind
King,
of rally in Ottawa.
Yeah. No. Pat King is preoccupied. Yeah. That might be, well, I'm not sure if it's going to be next week's discussion, but yeah, Pat King will discuss a little bit more as we get more details. For the short of it, his sentencing hearings have started. No decisions made, so we'll be waiting to find out what the ending is at some point.
Thanks for coming again, Joe.
Thanks
Ashley,
for having me.
how do you feel? Was it cathartic?
Good. I feel good. I feel like, yeah, I've got to say my things. My husband appreciates the fact that I get to talk to you folks instead of him all the time.
Keeping the peace.
Yeah, exactly. I know. He's like, I love you, but I don't care. I'm like, okay, it's fine. It's fair.
So are you going to vote for Mark Carney in the Liberal leadership?
100%. Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah. My favorite. Yeah. No, great. Thank you for having me. It was nice to talk and rant and share some information, So complicated information out there, There's a lot of moving pieces everywhere all the time. It's hard to keep your
and I
eye
had
on
no
anything.
idea we would get so much information on carbon capture, the fact that it doesn't exist. But I feel
I could talk forever about it. I won't, but I could.
Well, maybe you could. Maybe we'll call you back in for the blueprints of carbon capture, and it'll be a really short episode.
Yeah.
It's just going to be Ashley going, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's a scam.
And then just blank space after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy your Friday. And as always, stay disruptive.